Hey, welcome to Texas Tracks and Taps. I'm Coy.
I'm John.
I'm Graham. We are coming to you with episode 2. Much awaited. Taking us a little bit of time to get this one out to you. Thanks for your patience. Hope you enjoyed episode 1 in the meantime, but we got a great episode lined up for you guys today. Graham, first off, I think we wanted to circle back to where we left off on the first episode, which was we gave an assignment to John.
Yeah, that's right, Coy. So we gave John the assignment of listening to a local Dallas artist named Ishi. And so we just want to throw it to John now, kind of get his impressions of Ishi, what he thought of their music, and just his general overall thoughts on Ishi. John?
Yeah, thanks, Graham, and thanks, Coy. So first, I got to tell you guys, I really enjoyed this exercise because I love discovering new music, and I had never heard Ishi before, never listened to any of their music. And so the whole exercise was just super cool just to kind of, check somebody new out that wasn't on my personal radar. So, I went to, I think, a lot of the resources that, anybody would probably hit just to try to check out a new artist. And YouTube was the first one. And so the first thing that I found is, this is not the type of music that is normally in John's wheelhouse. Like, it's not the stuff that I would typically gravitate towards. Ishi is electronic, and I think in some respects you might call it synthy. I'm hesitant to say 1980s type music, but there's definitely, when you listen to some of the tracks out there, there's definitely hints of the 80s and even the 70s. Like, there's one track called Disco Queen that, hails back to the 1970s. But a couple of the ones that I actually listened to, obviously Disco Queen was one of the first ones, but I really dug the tracks Moon Sky, Emotional Hard Drive, which is, I think, one of their older songs. If I recall correctly, it's like 10 or 11 years old. By the way, the video for that track is actually super cool. And it harkens back to the Pink Floyd days of Another Brick in the Wall. I kind of got a little bit of an influence in the video on that one. And then Goody Goody, and then Ride or Die. And there's definitely a couple of those tracks that were with other artists. It wasn't just Ishi. Some were, rappers. Some of them were just other singers added in. But super cool. I really dug it. Like I said, it's electronic synth type music. And I think the guy who fronts the band, his last name is Mudd, if I recall correctly. I think it's JJ Mudd. But, really different artists. I love the fact that they're, Texas based, of course, and something different. It's not the typical type of music that you would think comes out of Texas. So I really enjoyed it. So thanks, guys, for turning me on to Ishi.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I totally agree with everything you said. Like, they are very different, and that's why we kind of wanted to introduce you to them, something a little outside your wheelhouse, like we kind of discussed before. But yeah, they're really good. And yeah, you mentioned like one of your favorites was, an older song, and yeah, I really like that. That first album is really, really, really good. Other ones are also good, but I really love that first album. They're really a lot of fun live. We should definitely go check them out. You get a chance to check them out in person. I think that would be fun. So next up, we're gonna go ahead and dive into the episode, which is talking about our top 10 most impactful Texas artists.
So I'm going to preface this by saying, anybody that's listening, there's no right and there's no wrong answers to any top 10 list that's out there. And this exercise for the three of us was painful. We sat at a brewery just penciling out dozens and dozens Texas-based artists. We actually are really fortunate that so many artists hail from Texas, which makes it, so much more complex to try to nail down to just 10. But we met in person. We scratched off like a bunch of sheets of paper and really tried to agree on different artists that should be in the top 10. We wound up text messaging each other and revising those lists. And as late as last night, we still were not in agreement on the top 10. So we really tried to craft this list in terms of what were the Texas-based artists that made the greatest impact or made an impact in music in general, or perhaps maybe in their genre. And, before we actually dive into the actual list itself, there's a couple of artists that we want to give honorable mention to. They're artists that, very easily could fall into the top 10 of anybody else's list. But Townes Van Zandt, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Don Henley, ZZ Top. I mean, these may front the list and be number one for a lot of people, but the list that we're about to share with you, they didn't crack the top 10. So we just kind of wanted to call them out and give them honorable mention. But on the Texas Tracks and Taps top 10 list, we're going to start with number 10 with a female rocker from the 1960s who really made a significant impact in a very short period of time. Unfortunately, her life was cut short at a very young age, and that is Miss Janis Joplin, who made famous, Me and Bobby McGee, who was also, that was written by another famous Texan that may or may not be on the list, but she just made a very quick impact and a indelible impact on rock music in the late 1960s. And she was very young when she passed away. So that's our number 10.
Yeah. Thanks, John. I think the random order we decided to go in, I'm next. And so I randomly get this person who I think I actually championed for to be on the top 10 list. And I mean, our first draft, there were no ladies on the list. And that's just not to say that there aren't a ton of talented ladies. I know you were mentioning our honorable mentions. Selena would be up there too. I know we talked about her. I think she just missed the cut. For me personally, like Janis, maybe, I wasn't championing for her in the top 10 as much as I was for this next person. Not that everyone that we're going to talk about is not deserving to be in here, but since the first conversation where I was saying this person should probably be in here, they have now become, I think, the most Grammy nominated female or artist. I don't think female or male comes into the equation. I think it's just artist, period. The Grammy nominations just came out, I think, last week or two. So at number 9, we do have Beyonce out of Houston, of course, with Destiny's Child first, gone on to an even more successful solo career, taking over country music, or trying to now, and getting the nominations and the recognition. Probably somewhat controversial that she hasn't won as many Grammys as she's been nominated for, but just the fact she holds the record for nominations, it says a lot. But we talked about music that's not necessarily in our wheelhouse, but we can appreciate when we're talking about Ishi, and this probably falls into this category for us. We are not going to be Beyonce experts by any mean, but there's no way we haven't heard of her, and there's no way we don't recognize the impact that she has on music. She belongs in the top 10 for sure. Yes. Yeah. So glad to see the ladies in here. There were definitely more, and we'll have more audible mentions as we go on. But yeah, she came in on our list at number 9. And again, no right or wrong answers. It was easier to come up with the, first on. It really got difficult when it came down to who makes the actual 10 at these early or these late spots. So it definitely feels more wrong as we go through these than right. But as we go, I think we'll feel more right about it. But again, please disagree with us. Please agree with us. Please comment when you're at how wrong or right we got it or who we left out. So we'd love to hear from you guys. But with that being said, we'll go to number 8
Absolutely. Thank you, Coy. So number 8, we have a guy who just massive impact in the country music genre. I don't know how many billions of records he sold, but it's quite impressive. And he's still going to this day and has toured recently and, sells out arenas still. But this guy, I guess, kind of was at his peak, probably say late 80s, early 90s. But George Strait is our number 8. And yeah, you can't deny. I mean, I was never a country music fan growing up. I just wasn't my wheelhouse at all. But you couldn't avoid George Strait. I mean, just knowing who he was and knowing his songs. And yeah, he was a crossover, so to speak, for sure, into the mainstream from that country music. And yeah, just revered, I think, in Texas for sure. People love him here. So, and there's good reason. So George Strait comes in at number 8, and then I'll kick it to John for number 7.
Yeah, number 7. Before I get into number 7, I think maybe it's appropriate that we raise a quick toast to the brewery. I don't know if one of you guys want to share which brewery we're we're drinking tonight, but I'll hold it up.
Yes. Manhattan Project.
Manhattan Project. Yes.
Showing up in my camera.
Another good Dallas brew. And the reason why I think
Proper glassware.
yes, I've got my old pyramid from back in Seattle, but
this is actually a Manhattan Project glass.
oh, nice.
Little logo. Yes.
Well, why is it appropriate to raise a toast to number 7? Well, he was known for his drinking for sure. And he's a Saratoga, Texas native, was known for his hard drinking, along with his very famous wife that he was married to, Tammy Wynette. But another country great, along with George Strait, is another George, Mr. George.
All the Georges.
Yes, lots of Georges. So, and George Jones, I think while he was alive, was commonly known as like the world's best country singer or living country singer at the time. Had just dozens of different hits in the country world. And this was, decades before George Strait ever kind of hit the scene. And I think one of my favorite songs, because I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, was a song that he did with Garth Brooks. It was on one of Garth Brooks' later albums. So, but yeah, he's just done a ton of duets through the years and had dozens of number 1 country singles through the years as well. So, go ahead, kick it over to you for number 6.
Yeah. And I'll just say that it is fun to go through this list and see that, George Jones definitely inspired George Strait, who then definitely inspired the country that we have today. And, and so it's great. I'm sure this list will be changing, as the years go on. You really don't know someone's impact until, way after it's obvious. So, but that being said, number 6 is one that we just spent part of an episode 1 reflecting on his impact, and that I think he was definitely recognized in his time right off the bat by other artists. He was the artist and the artist songwriter. You wanted this guy to write a song. You wanted to perform one of his songs. And then, but he could also sing his own songs. He could also be in movies. So you might know by those hints, we are talking about Chris Christopherson. We won't spend too much time talking about him today, just because, like I said, we did spend a pretty good segment talking about him and his legacy in episode 1, because he had passed. He was on our list before he passed, and I think it was maybe the next day or two after we kind of had our first draft, at least, that we got that news, and we were just like, wow, that's, just having just recently reflected on him. That was made it even more emotional. And so we were like, well, let's just talk about him in episode 1. So I've already said probably more than I meant to on that, but it's still definitely on our hearts and minds. But with no further ado, we'll kick it to Graham for number 5.
Yeah. So at number 5, absolute legend in blues guitar and folk as well. I mean, he kind of crossed over into multiple genres, but at number 5, we have Lead Belly. I mean, just the sound of his voice and is just so unique, and just kind of created a genre of his own. Now, he was actually born in Louisiana, but he grew up here and claimed Texas as his home. But yeah, I mean, this guy, just legendary and so many rights, and you just can't really quantify like the impact he's had on music in general. Yeah. So, there's not a lot more I can say on Lead Belly. I'm not an expert on him, but I know just from listening to other artists who will list him as impacts and influences on them, that I just know that he's huge in the music world, and it would be wrong to omit him from this list.
So number 5, Lead Belly. I've legitimately been listening to his tunes for probably 15 to 20 years. Like,
Yeah.
before I moved to Texas, Lead Belly was on my radar for the blues. And I remember picking up, I probably have a good like 7 or 8 albums from his recordings back in the day. None of them original, obviously, but just one of my favorites. When I listen to blues, he's honestly one of my favorites to listen to. And the craftsmanship into his songs and just being a great musician echoes with me. Like I really dig him.
Yeah.
So.
We should have planned it better and had you take Lead Belly. I know you're a big fan, and you know more about him than I do.
Well, I was going to say, most of these artists on our list are probably going to have their own segment, if not their own episode at some point in our podcast. I think we definitely want to say more than we are getting a chance to say right now about them, just for sake of time. My introduction to Lead Belly being Nirvana covering Where Did You Sleep Last Night doing MTV Unplugged. But I definitely am by no means an expert, just know his influence is pretty special. If, that's when you are introduced to him as, MTV and Kurt Cobain. But sorry, but back to number.
No, that's good. Number 4 is somebody that, believe it or not, right before I moved to Texas, I went to a thrift store and I found an old 10-inch record, which are kind of hard to come by. You don't really see a lot of those, of this artist, and didn't really know much about him. And I would venture to say that if there's anybody that's, in their 40s, 30s, 20s, like, you probably are not super familiar with this next one. But for his time, he made a significant impact on Texas music. And that is a gentleman that hailed from, I'm going to probably slaughter the name of this city, but I believe it's Cossie, Texas, or Coss, Texas. That's where he hails from. But Mr. Bob Wills, who was known back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s as the king of Western swing, he really created an entire genre of music and type of music back in that time period. So obviously that's way past all of us when we were born and started listening to music, but it's undeniable to look back and see the impact that Bob Wills had on music. And when I was reading up on some of his other impacts, he was one of the first musicians to bring in Bessie Smith, who was a big blues artist back in the 20s and 30s, and actually do music with Bessie Smith as well. So, and then Texas swing, was kind of a sub genre at that time as well, very similar to Western swing, but he was well known for that as well. So I don't know if you guys, being natives, if you have anything to add about Bob Wills.
Yeah, he was not a stranger in my house. I knew Bob Wills. We listened to Bob Wills when I was growing up, because my dad's my paternal grandfather was in a Texas swing band, played upright bass, and that was, was able to do that because Bob Wills had already pioneered that, and it was still popular, and you could still go around and make a touring of Texas living, playing that music, get on the radio and stuff like that. So my musical roots, and the reason that I genetically have musical roots and wanted to pick up guitar and bass and things like that, is, my grandfather, but also, that's where, we owe a lot to that personally. And I'll add this other note that you didn't add, John. It's just this, that the state of Texas has an official music genre. People may not know this, but when you look up, you can see like our state flower, bird, pie, Thanksgiving side, Starbucks order, all kinds of things that are, the official Texas things. But yeah, Western or Texas swing is the official music of the state of Texas, as decreed by a governor, and I forget which one. But so that says a lot about what he means to Texas, is that, it's recognized at the government level.
Yeah.
For him. Anything to add, Graham?
And it's, like you said, it's Texas swing is something that's uniquely Texas. It came from here, and I think it might be one of the first, genres that kind of just came out of Texas solely. And and you can't go to any country bar and not experience his impact. At number 3, we have, and this was someone who I think we're kind of a late addition. I think we threw his name out there multiple times in discussions, but I think after all was kind of considered more of kind of what we were going for the list, just overall impact on the music world, we definitely had to put this guy on here. And the more we thought about it, the higher and higher he got up on the list. And that is Roy Orbison, who, his birthplace is escaping me at the moment, but, just I mean, everyone knows, Pretty Woman. That's something that nobody can avoid, and he was so unique in his style and his voice. It was just something that kind of came out of nowhere, and no one had ever heard anything quite like him before. And yeah, I mean, to this day, I mean, his impact is just huge, across the music world. I mean, from everything across genres too. I think Roy, you know, he just bleeds over into all genres as far as his influence. He's not just a country music influence or just a rock and roll influence or just a pop music influence. It's just a myriad of different genres that he kind of bleeds into and had a huge impact on. And so it'd be a shame to leave him off this list and not have him in the top three as we do. And if y'all have anything to add,
He was a traveling Wilbury as well.
yes, yes, that's a good point. I forgot about that with Tom Petty,
Petty,
Bob Dylan.
yeah, George Harrison,
Hmm.
yeah, and Crying, like that's one of my favorites. That's just a classic song. So yeah, good old Roy was fantastic and had one of the most beautiful voices, like male voices that was ever existed. It was
Yeah,
fantastic. So
so unique. Just his voice
yeah.
was unique for sure. So
All right. Well, I've got number two, and this is another. I think as we got higher up the list, we realized like the impact is not just to Texas, but really to the world, definitely all of America. So our number two is Buddy Holly, another on the list that definitely gone way too early, and would have loved to see where that, more of Buddy Holly could have gone to if he had like lived to the Chris Christopherson age, what more would we have? But what we did get was some of the best rock and roll. I mean, the Beatles don't happen if they never hear Buddy Holly and the Crickets. So, I mean, they might still happen, but you gotta admit that there's a strong reason that he's the reason that they got together in the first place to start playing music. And yeah, he's definitely on my list of when I got into music, it was oldies. It was stuff that my parents listened to when they were a kid. And you kind of try, I think, to share that with your kids. And, when we'd go to the pizza place that had the jukebox with all the oldies stuff on it, it was always, always had to get Buddy Holly and their Roy Orbison in there. So, Righteous Brothers too, not Texas. But that being said, he was always in the mix. That'll Be the Day is, it's hard to pick one. That one just such a great song, but then, also can kind of be a dark song when you think about what happened. So, but yeah, he's definitely very influential on rock and roll, and that he came from Lubbock is, we have a lot of pride in Texas and from people who come from Texas, and to be able to put that up on our scoreboard and hold that over other states. We'll do that all day long here in Texas. But John, what is your take on Buddy Holly not being a native Texan? Give us that perspective.
Well, first I was going to say, like, it would have really sucked if Weezer had to put out a song called Bob Wills or Leadville. Like, so, I mean, obviously,
Probably would not have done as well.
yeah. So, yeah, it was just a perfect title for a song. No, Buddy Holly, yeah, I keep using the term undeniable, but like, he had a significant impact on rock and roll, and it wasn't known at the time as rockabilly, but I think, nowadays, that rockabilly sound, which is something, man, I've got like a couple boxes full of rockabilly I've got Buddy Holly and the Crickets in there, and just made a huge impact on rock and roll in general, early in the 20th century. And so a lot of artists that became famous actually started out playing as musicians with Buddy Holly, playing like background musicians, because I believe Waylon Jennings, Ricky Nelson, I think they all kind of got their start like, with Buddy Holly and kind of running in those packs. And so it's amazing, I go out to Lubbock, today and see what Lubbock is like today. And it's a big city, but, think back into the 50s, Lubbock probably wasn't that big of a city. And to have a guy come from that town and just blow up worldwide. I mean, he had an international impact on music. Yeah, it's just incredible. So I would definitely put him up there. Like he would, he's towards the top of my own personal list as well. So I'll just kind of give a little glimpse to my list. But yeah, he was fantastic. And I love finding, I always throw everything back to vinyl. I love finding those old Buddy Holly albums, man. If you can find like old 45s or even a full LP of Buddy Holly, they're so hard to come by. And when they're not beat to hell, if they're in good shape, they're really hard to come by. So one of my faves for sure. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Weezer. I mentioned Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, and like that, our list has roots in like the music that we grew up with, and that was so influential to us. And it's I mean, there's a reason these guys are where they're at on our lists.
Well, you ready for number one?
Number one.
All right.
I've been ready.
Well, number one, this is another one that just such an impact over the years. And we're talking about a career that, started out in the 1940s and 50s. And this guy is still pumping out music to this day. Like he's still touring. He's still putting out new albums. I think he just put one out this year.
Just a month ago.
Yeah. And it's fantastic, right? He's not one of these guys that you're like, man, he should have like hung it up 20 years ago. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's Willie Nelson, guys. Like Willie Nelson just has a career like almost nobody else out there from a songwriting perspective. Just to rattle off a couple of them, like On the Road Again, Seven Spanish Angels, Always on My Mind, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. I mean, we probably could sit here and talk for like 5 hours just about Willie Nelson and his career. Also acted. He had a couple of acting gigs through the years, but he started out, I believe, as a songwriter. And it's funny to look back on Willie Nelson back from the 1950s when he's all clean cut and shaven and not looking like he's looked for like the past 30 years or 40 years. But he started out as a songwriter, I think, in Nashville and wrote songs for a lot of other people, also recorded on the side. And man, he has just had a fantastic career. I mean, Chris Christopherson's a guy that we talked about in the last episode who had a real storied career. Willie Nelson kicks his ass, like seriously. So, it was just a no-brainer for me. Like it's really hard to say that there's anybody out there that has had a better career and made more of an impact in their genre than Willie Nelson did in country music and in pop music, because a lot of his songs through the 70s and the 80s hit the pop charts. So just, fantastic career. Hails from Abbott, Texas, which I don't know where the heck that is, guys. Like, I don't even.
Honestly, I don't either.
I
There's so many small little towns in Texas. Who knows where they are?
But yeah. So what do you guys think about Willie?
Man,
This
go ahead.
this is the easiest one, I think, on our list for us.
That's exactly what I was
There was
gonna
no
say.
argument. There was
As
no
far as, like,
debate.
Every number on the list we had debate about.
At least
except for
some.
number one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
except for number one, because we all agreed from the jump. Like,
Well, so
King.
being native Texans, what was your first Willie Nelson song that you fell in love with, that you loved? Do you remember?
So I got two answers for that, because we also listened to a lot of Patsy Cline, and I loved Crazy. Crazy. And then I found out as I grew older that he wrote that, and I'm like, well, that's probably why I love it so much. And then I found his version, and I'm like, gosh, I mean, I definitely like hers the best, but that's a great version on its own too, just him singing it. And then, but probably Mama's Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys was one of the earliest ones. Just we played that one a lot. But as I got older and really dug into his music and his catalog more, it's Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain for me. It's hard to pick one. I will say another one is, I love Pearl Jam's version of Just Breathe. And I think him and Lucas's version, Lucas Nelson, his son, their version might be better, or at least more personal to me. just because of, my dad introducing me to Willie Nelson and that being a very father-son kind of moment for them too. But both versions are great. But I just love it. He can write a song for somebody else. He can take somebody else's song. He is jack of all trades and couldn't embody Texas more than anyone else on our list, I don't think. And yeah, Graham, what do you want to add?
Yeah, for sure. Mama's, was definitely the first one I remember, growing up as a kid. I'm hearing that, just roll me up and smoke me when I die. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I love that song though. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't escape it. You couldn't escape Willie Nelson, and why would you want to? I mean, it was just he's just such a likable, lovable person. First of all, it just exudes like good spirit and happy vibes, and we just love him as Texans. He's just he's our guy, And yeah, so I mean, he's number one. He's the king of Texas. There's no denying it, in my opinion. Like, that's hands down.
And he is the only person that Snoop Dogg has said can smoke more weed than he can.
Right.
And I was going to call out, like, I think in the last episode I talked about, or one of the last episodes I talked about Highwaymen. That was one of my first 45s that I ever bought. And so Willie, was part of that band. But I'd agree with you, Graham, like Mama's Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys was one of the first times I can recall, hearing Willie Nelson sing. But I always have fond memories now that Christmas is coming up in the next month or so. The song Pretty Paper, and even though he is known for his weed, that song is not about weed.
Okay.
He did a Christmas album, and Pretty Paper, I think, was written back in the 60s. And, an original Christmas song that always resonates with me. I always loved it. It's one of my favorite Christmas albums to listen to. And that song in particular, Pretty Paper, is fantastic as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that wraps it up for our most impactful top 10 of Texas. Please check back soon for part 2 of episode 2, where we discuss our personally most impactful Texas artists. See you then.